If you've ever been hiking and have faced the prospect of trying to climb up this treacherous mountain face, you'll know that sometimes the best way is actually to wind around. And even though it might take, in your mind, more time because it looks like you're going off course, because your goal is to get to the top, to see the views, to have a picnic there, to meditate there. I've done that. It's amazing. And what can happen is that when we are anchored into our everyday existence and we awaken to manifesting our destiny, or even just taking control of our life consciously and intentionally, we can set goals. And being goal driven is highly emblematic of success in the Western culture and in other cultures too, but particularly in the West. And what can happen, and this is especially for my neurodivergent listeners and those that tend towards the gifted and talented in particular, what can happen is that you go after accomplishment after accomplishment, mountain after mountain. It's a thing. It's actually, when you talk to neurodivergent or gifted, highly capable, intelligent people, they're always learning a new hobby, or running a marathon, or picking up the guitar, or going for that promotion, going for that degree, starting up a business, starting up several businesses. And I knew somebody that was into martial arts, and they really wanted to win competitions and get their black belt, and they did. And when they did, the telltale thing happened. They're also gifted, incredibly gifted. There was kind of like this emptiness. Like, well, now what do I do? Well, if you're like me, before I was awake, I'm not saying that you are, I would sign up for another mountain, and I would go mountain chasing, and I would sprint up the mountain, as treacherous as it might be, and I would get to the top. And of course there was a moment of glory, there was a moment of satisfaction, but then this prevailing sense of nagging opportunity, unfulfilled, which didn't make sense to me. Like, how could I be at the top of the mountain and feel like there was something that I didn't do? And we get caught up sometimes, not everybody. And I don't anymore. I don't do this anymore. But we get caught up in the chasing of the dream. And we get caught up in the goal. And you will hear people talk about not being so obsessed with the destination and enjoying the journey. And I have only just now recently come to appreciate what that really means. And that is, when you set the path-winding course, it allows room to not only take breaks, but to traverse the mountain and really enjoy it. Because the enjoyment is not in the obtaining anymore. The enjoyment is actually part of the fuller experience of existing. And the mountain is not as important, because when you've climbed a lot of mountains, you know, they kind of work the same. There's obstacles, there's rocks, there might even be villains in the bushes, wildcats that are going to claw out your throat. No, of course not. But depending on the mountain you're climbing and where you're climbing, possibly. And you might have to have a machete and be chopping down your own path. That's exciting too. And you might run into cannibals, or this is part of the hero's journey. And you might have some tests, you might run out of food, you might get lost. But all in all, mountains are kind of mountains. They're actually kind of predictable. Even if the scenery looks different, even if the people there are different, even if the journey, the stones that you turn, or the mushrooms that you forage along the way, there can be differences, but when you zoom out from a conscious perspective, it's actually the same. Something happens when you start to awaken your consciousness, and especially when you travel a lot. At first, when you're hyper focused on just the material world, obsessed with it even, and can't see beyond it, then going to different places, different countries, different cultures holds a very strong appeal, because novelty is exciting for everybody and somewhat frightening as well, but mostly exciting. And then when you start to expand beyond just the physical world, you start to see things differently. You see the world differently. And you start to see the interconnected webs in the social dynamics. You start to see, oh, here is another Tartaria building. Oh, here is another monument. Oh, here's a cultural center. Here's a UNICEF center. And you just start to appreciate things beyond just the physical formality of the material world. And as a result, what happens, at least to me, is you really stop traveling just for the sake of traveling. It changes. You start traveling because you want to experience the energy of the place more, or the people or the community stands out to you more than the architecture. This is why I love Latin America. It's like such a beautiful, heart-centered place if you go to the right locations. Not every location is heart-centered, but you can find some really gem communities and spiritual centers, sites as well, that are just bubbling over with love and gratitude and gifts and high vibration. And there are some shadow places in the world too. Particularly in Southeast Asia was my experience. And there's beauty in that as well, because it's a different resonance. It's just a different vibration. It's a very potent vibration. And it taps into deities that we don't learn about in Western culture. And so you start to experience the world and the worlds differently, where just going and visiting a country for the sake of getting a badge or stamp in a passport, which is how I used to travel a long time ago. I wanted to see a place. I wanted to experience it. I wanted to do the touristy, not completely touristy things, but I wanted to eat the food, and I wanted to drive there and experience life there. And now it's almost a vibrational match that I'm looking for. And so what happens is that the mountains, similarly, the goals, the achievements in your life, the jobs that you take, the promotions that you go for, the hobbies that you learn, are no longer about the ego, because after a while they're just empty placeholders of trophies. And when you are adept at collecting trophies, you put them all up on your wall and you lose sight of them. They become blurry. It's like, oh yeah, I got this trophy here and I got that trophy there, and there's something nice about it, right? But all in all, it's just really a vapid collection versus the meaning that you really start to connect with when you expand beyond just the three-dimensional consciousness. And this is where I'm at now, where it is all about the journey and less about the destination. In fact, sometimes I don't even know where I'm going. I literally don't know. And I kind of like that. And I like feeling out where's calling me, who's calling me, what is calling me. So the pathwinding experience is about breaking down the notion of getting to your manifestation as quickly as possible. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's merit in that, right? But the beauty of the pathwinding experience is that as you are trekking up the mountain and you start to wind around, you get to meet other travelers that you might not would have met. You get to gain other skills. You get different views of the mountain, different vista points, and by the time you get up to the top, the you that now has collected a variety of different friendships or experiences or magical herbs that you found along the way, you could have fun with it. But the you that shows up to the top of the mountain is an edified version of you that sometimes is unpredictably beautiful or handsome in ways that you can't set out in a manifestation journal preemptively and say that you're going to obtain this secret skill that you didn't see coming, or this gift is going to open up, or you're going to meet somebody that is going to introduce you to somebody else who you never would have met if you were just headlong going straight up the mountain with your blinders on. And so the opportunities that you can develop, the life mosaic that you can harness to your advantage is much more robust if you do appreciate the journey, if you do take in the scenery, take in the vibe, and move away from just the active state, the active masculine, regardless of your gender. So let's pull it into the practical. When I was a coach for the gifted and talented, I worked with an individual who was transitioning from high school to college. And they had some fairly negative experiences growing up, as most people do, but theirs was particularly rough. And so understandably, they were not very inclined to put themselves out there socially. And it can be quite common for the gifted and talented because they can feel so out of place and so alienated. And those early childhood experiences can really break an individual's spirit because kids are really mean. And the more different you are, the worse it is. And even though we've grown collectively in our consciousness as a society and our educational practices are much better, there is still such a thing as bullying. And it doesn't always have to be overt. And sometimes it even comes from the teachers, because the teachers themselves don't appreciate the challenge of a young kid keeping them on their toes. And this is what the professional training experience, one part of it at least, that when we train teachers, I don't train teachers anymore, but this is part of the educational experience for the teachers, is helping them understand the gifted mind and the gifted child. So this individual didn't really have issues with other adults, but had a lot of negative experience socially. So when they were transitioning into college, they were dead set on not making any friends, not trying to date, nada. They just wanted to get in and out and to their cushy job at the end. And they had big ambitions for their cushy job. And I totally believe that they would obtain it as well. But part of me was sad for them because I knew the opportunity of college and how fun it could be for them, and how they had the opportunity to rewrite their destiny if they were to approach their reality differently. So a lot of my coaching work was working with them on their mental blocks and helping them to start fresh and putting themselves out there. And they made a lot of progress, actually, and were even going to social events unprompted. And we're working through it. You know, it was really beautiful to see their journey. So this is an example of having that goal, putting on the blinders and saying, I'm not going to make any friends. I'm not going to take any pit stops. I'm just going to go straight up. And although it is a viable path for everybody, right? Especially if you have the stamina and the strength, the stubbornness and determination, and the goat energy, then you can absolutely do that. In my experience, and also working with gifted adults, in my experience, there's something lost there. There is a characteristic of the persona that is overlooked when we go too fast. Because part of the journey is integrating the wisdom along the way. And part of that requires taking those breaks at those vistas, learning how to make a fire from sticks and stones, random stuff in the wilderness, not because you have to, but because it edifies some ability within you, a confidence, an untapped confidence that you might not otherwise gain. Watching the sunrise or the sunset from a camping site that you didn't plan on stopping at, and then meeting the love of your life along the way, or meeting a soul brother or sister, is such a rewarding experience that you can't always foresee. And that is why there's so much beauty in the pathwinding journey that I encourage you to let your life path take you in random places. Follow those urges to create, to explore a random skill or random hobby, or go to out of your way to a random place just because you feel the vibe, you feel a calling, and allow for the beauty of serendipity to unfold around you and see where it takes you. And sometimes maybe you just show up alone on the side of the mountain and you just have a private moment with nature and the birds, and that does something to your soul that you didn't know was possible. So embrace the pathwinding experience. And if you are interested in working together, particularly if you are identified or suspect that you're gifted and talented, it is my specialty. And particularly those who are also experiencing spiritual awakening or reality shifting, sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com.